Kwe Nindaluizi Pampometer. I'm from the Mi'kmaq Nation and member of Eel River Bar First Nation in northern New Brunswick. I'm also the chair in Indigenous governance at Ryerson University, a practicing lawyer, and an activist and organizer for social movements. The really amazing thing about Idle No More and how it got started is that it's been ongoing since contact. There have always been Indigenous leaders, Indigenous women, and grassroots people trying to resist the colonization that was happening. The interesting thing about Idle No More, however, was that we took a little bit of a different approach. We'd always looked to leaders and chiefs and organizations to do the organizing and the rallying, and we decided it wasn't enough. So we decided to educate the grassroots people and say we need to be the ones that rise up, and we need to actually engage our treaty partners and say, hey, stop being idle and rise up with us and, take this country back for the people. How the Idle No More name came about, it really was just a tweet when we were engaging in some of our teach-ins. So at the very beginning we decided, how are we going to get people mobilized? And we thought they need the information. And so as we were doing teach-ins and as we were meeting in different communities, we just kept using the hashtag Idle No More, so that it would be attached to the things that we were doing. And there were other names that were being used at the same time, but Idle No More seemed to be the one that really caught on with the grassroots people, and that's how it started. Some of the core values of Idle No More was first and foremost not to be a movement that was led by one person, that was being controlled by any particular political organization, or that we looked to the traditional male leaders to do it. We decided that there are so many educated and active and traditional Indigenous women across the country that we're already planted in our communities. We're already working at the grassroots level. All we have to do is share that information and empower everyone else to join us in the movement. And I think that's why you saw that it was Indigenous women who led it in the beginning. We are trying to stop all of the things that we don't like that's going on in this country. So undemocratic laws, lack of consultation or engagement with citizenship and First Nations, the destruction of our environment. Really, we've gone so far beyond what real democracies are, because democracies are governing by the people, for the people, and it has become something that's in just the hands of a few. So we decided, let's empower not just ourselves as Indigenous peoples, but other Canadians to see how our issues impact them as well. Poison water for us equally impacts poison water for Canadians, and so that's what we thought really was about engaging everyone and not just an Indigenous movement. I think the whole Idle No More movement and the rising up of Canadians and Indigenous people really changed the relationship between Indigenous peoples, Canadians, and the government, in the sense that they realized that we have reasserted our power, that we've never given up our power, our sovereignty, our treaties, our laws, and our traditions that have kept us alive, and we were reasserting it in two different ways. One, we were asserting our rights, boots on the ground and in the courts and in the political realm, but also withdrawing from processes that weren't working for us. And I think that's just as key to making sure that we don't legitimize processes that aren't working for Canadians or Indigenous peoples. I work with a lot of different First Nations and First Nations political organizations, and also grassroots organizations and communities. Like here in Toronto, there's lots of organizations that do a lot of different things and movements, from Black Lives Matter and anti-poverty groups and anti-homeless groups, environmental groups. And we have found through Idle No More that we have a lot of allies in all of these organizations, especially unions and teachers and women's groups. And we've found that by acting in solidarity, not only do we reinforce what they're advocating for, but they can help reinforce what we're advocating for. And there's a lot of lessons learned from that, best practices, if you want to call it that. And that's really been the strength. Probably the best thing that's come out of Idle No More movement was to make these connections and then work in solidarity on a go-forward basis. So one of the things that we found post Idle No More was that it was a lot easier to organize and rally around issues and events that are happening because we had already made these huge connections both in Canada and the US. So one of the things we were able to do very quickly was rally around the Dakota Access Pipeline in a wide variety of ways. So there was us doing commentary in the media, we were reaching out to people who could provide services, who could provide supplies. We were sending people so that there would be boots on the ground. We had lawyers involved. We had everything that you need to support a movement around a single community who wouldn't have the resources to do it themselves. And as you can see, it has turned out to be one of the largest movements in American history in recent times with regards to Indigenous peoples. One of the best things that has happened since Idle No More is the connections that we made, because now they're permanent. Now when Black Lives Matter needs to organize on the ground, we already have the connections there. We can work with them, be it in Toronto or whatever city. And it's the same with union issues or environmental issues. We have all of the connections in place and we continue to foster them even when there's no events happening in between. And the other really important thing for us as Indigenous peoples is that we got informed. And now that empowerment that we did by going around and visiting communities and little groups of people saying, here's what's happening, here's what the implications are, that those same people and more want to know more and want to stay involved, and they don't just accept the answer that we see from politicians anymore. We don't just accept the really 5-minute blurb on the media. Everyone challenges everything, and that's probably, for me, the most impactful, because it was like we were all just accepting what we were seeing and hearing as if it was true. Yes, the government has good intentions, but when you really look behind and look at the research and see the facts and data, that's the important part. And we've found that that's now spread within our communities. So the people that we were informing are now helping inform other people, and we're reaching younger and younger people. So now it's about empowering kids in high schools and junior highs and elementary schools. And some people may think that that's too young, but in fact, there are so many children who are actually actively engaged in environmental issues. It's not a far stretch to also say, well, here's what's happening with Indigenous peoples, and here's what's happening in, the anti-poverty movement and issues around racism and what they can do about it. And I think the younger that you get these children, the far more likely it is we're going to be able to create empathetic, compassionate, kind, loving, caring adults, the kind of people that we want to be as our neighbors and friends and colleagues. I think when you go out into the community, you have to expect something different than lawyers speaking at a lawyer's forum or people involved in unions rallying each other, because we're all preaching to the converted. Indigenous leaders talking to other Indigenous leaders. When you go out into the community, you have to first and foremost take people where they are. They're not all going to be at the same information level. They're not all going to have had the same experiences, and there's going to be a lot of anger. And one of the things we realized as organizers is whether or not that anger was directed at us or other issues, we actually have to accept that and take that and understand that when we're talking about murdered and missing Indigenous women and little girls, that this impacts hospitals, it impacts teachers, it impacts professionals, it impacts communities, and we have to be able to sit there and understand the concerns and where they come from. And that there's going to be a wide range of people and a wide range of concerns, and we have to really listen and not always be so quick to respond. Sometimes as a form of empathy, we want to say, oh, I totally understand what you're saying, and that can actually work against you. Sometimes just listening is the best when you're going out into communities. And the other thing that we have to keep in mind is when we go out to communities, sometimes the people that we're meeting with are the same people that always show up to community meetings. They're always actively engaged. We need to find ways to reach those people who don't engage, who are disengaged for lots of reasons. And I think that's going to be extremely important when teachers go out and try to engage in communities. What about all the peoples who aren't there? How do you engage with them? I think one of the lessons that's important in organizing is to be open. That this is about including everyone and everyone's voice and everyone's perspective. One particular voice might not be the one that leads the way in a particular strategic direction or in a piece of litigation or in a decision that's made, but we really can't be making community-based decisions without hearing what everybody has to say and really trying to work towards consensus, as opposed to the default of the 51% is the way to go. That we have to find ways of, even if we're going to go in a particular direction, there's always a way to incorporate the concerns and the requests of other people that might not be in that same direction, but there's ways to mitigate the issues that they're talking about, for example. 5 steps to organizing. The first 2 are the most important because they're the ones you don't do with anyone else but yourself. The first thing you have to do is decide, what do you have to offer? One of the most difficult things for people who are actually actively involved in a movement of any kind is to be inundated with hundreds and hundreds of phone calls of people saying, hey, I'm here. You really need to know what it is you have to offer. Are you offering financial support? Are you boots on the ground? Are you the kind of person that does support behind the scene? Are you providing food for people? Are you doing something as invisible as babysitting for the people who are going to be in a march? Or helping people do research for a court case that's coming up that's part of your movement? All of these things don't get any media attention. There's not a lot of celebrations around it, but it's those supports around the people that are in the movement doing the boots on the ground stuff that is probably the most important. It's what sustained Idle No More. Number 2 is we have to self-educate. So there's lots of really interested allies and people who are really eager to help in different movements, but they haven't yet taken a few minutes to actually educate about the issue that we're talking about. And because organizers are so few and far between, and because those who put their lives into, supporting social movements have to put so much time into it, they can't be expected to be the one to educate the whole world on these issues. So we have to take some responsibility and say, okay, I want to be an ally of the Indigenous movement. Instead of asking someone to explain the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to me, I'm going to go online, download the report, and read it myself. There's lots of things that we can do, and you can say that for any environmental issue. And those two things are the most important, what you do for yourself before you contact anyone. And then the third step is, when you do contact someone, you're able to say, here's what I have to offer, here's what I know, tell me what you need in terms of either organizing or litigation strategies or PR or social media, whatever it is, as opposed to telling people how it's going to be. Because for any movement, there's already people engaged in it. Why not come in as a support person and say, hey, I can help you organize, or I can help you do these things in these particular ways. And I think that's important, asking what they need, especially when we're talking about allies. So for us as Indigenous peoples in the movement, the worst thing that could be to happen is for people to come in and be our saviors instead of respectful allies. We don't need anyone to tell us what we want or what we need or what would make the world better. What we need are people to stand beside us and offer all of these supports. So number 4 in the 5 steps is really about strategic planning. And the thing about strategic planning is that not everything has to be pre-planned out really, really well. I mean, what we found with Idle No More was that it was so organic, we didn't have to tell people what to do. We would just put a call out, or we would say, this is what we're doing, and there would be solidarity events all across the country. So I don't think people should be obsessed with making sure every single thing is planned out to allow some of it to come out organically, but things like what kinds of issues are we going to raise in the media, who are we going to get involved, how are we going to do any damage control about negative media, all of those things I think are good to happen up front, and to have some plans around, if this happens, do we have lawyers on call in case people are arrested, or we want to do litigation, or we need a judicial review. Those kinds of things it's helpful if that's in place, but also to allow it just to happen organically. And sometimes you might start organizing community events, and then the communities might just take it off on themselves and host their own corresponding events and solidarity events, and people who aren't active in another area might say, hey, well, here in Nova Scotia we want to do this too, and it's about making space for that organic movement part to come. And the last one is really never forgetting that any social movement is a conversation with the public, and that it always has to be with the greatest of integrity and respect, because we are dealing with the Canadian public, so that everything we say and do has to be factual. No matter how emotional it is, no matter how intense it is, no matter how much we want something, the best way to engage with the public is with the facts. And so having researched ahead of time facts and figures that support your position are incredibly convincing. We found during the Idle No More movement that it was very easy to counter anything the government or those against our position had to say by having the countervailing fact and the resource document or the research right at hand. And I think arming people who speak in the media with those facts and figures and having that available on the internet and social media, that was one of our most effective weapons in convincing people who weren't traditionally our allies to be our allies, because some of it really is eye-opening. There's a lot of myths and stereotypes about every profession. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, you know, in the environmental movement, anti-poverty movement, what people think these things are about and whether or not it impacts them. We have to show them that it does, that everything we're doing impacts you in your future. I think the only other thing that I can think of that really would apply to elementary teachers trying to organize, especially in the community, is engaging with everyone, even people that you think might not be related to how do we get better schools, how do we get better education. The key to any social movement is to not just build relationships for the purpose of that social movement, but to maintain those relationships for those people that you're working with and their social movements. So really, even though sometimes we see our movements as individual, it's environmental, it's Indigenous, it's union-based, in fact, they're all the same. We all end up in the same place. We're looking for social justice, and we can't do that if only one movement is strong and we're weak on all the other fronts. But that requires that people who are in social movements have time to give to their partners who are helping them. And that can be difficult. But that being said, you gain so much back if you're the kind of person that's there when people call on you, so that when you need people, they'll be there for you. And it might not always be the same people. So trying to rely on particular individuals over and over and over and over again doesn't work. That's why we have to be so inclusive, we have to be so diverse and broad, and find different ways of staying involved in all of the other movements that are helping your particular movement.